Is
Okay.
my audio good?
Yeah, your audio is great.
Cool. We are live. Welcome to I Need Living Conversations. So happy to see everyone here on the channel, on the show, and through the many dimensions and through time and space. We are with you. We are in the process of manifestation of the greatest dream that could be imagined for humankind. And as part of that, we share each week one of our conversations. And this week we have this titled The Gospel of Greed. So that's very self-explanatory, and you might imagine what it is going to be about, but it's going to be very interesting and very revealing. And I know this kind of topic is very, very attractive for a lot of people because it really like touches on important things that need to be touched.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone. I'm with Blue Heron Woman, and she is going to give us this amazing teaching. And I'm Julian Katari, the co-creator, co-manifester of Aloha I Need Out Living. So take it off. How do we begin this?
Well, that's our current economic system is the gospel of greed with its competitive free market system founded on the concept of human self-interest. And it was, of course, not based on any natural system or law. This economic system with its, quotes, laws of supply and demand has the only purpose to energize and amplify the massive power of industrialized machinery and other technology to ever more quickly convert nature into various products. Our market economists do not know the way of nature or the salmon. And we're going to be talking about salmon economics as we evolve this.
Which is going against the mainstream.
It is essential for everyone to understand that our current market system is not based on natural laws and it is profoundly unnatural, even for humans. It's new in the history of humankind and the earth, and most of us assume that humans have always been competitive creatures involved in market economics, but that is not so. The reality is that cooperation, not competition, was the credo that bound early men and women to one another. The use of nature, the allocation of a community's resources, including human work, and the distribution of goods within a community always occurred outside of a marketing process. Within one generation, the concept of the market was transformed from a literal place of trade and barter to an ideology upon which an entire social system was created and upon which major false assumptions about nature and human nature were based. So the intellectual history of the market began with thinkers who committed themselves to discovering a rule of human behavior that were as efficient and predictable as the mathematical laws that Newton and the others had recently discovered. So they wanted humans to be predictable, like gravity, right? An 18th century philosopher rejected benevolence as the basis for human interaction and discounted any other ethical norm. Instead of turning to nature, he'd looked to the growing industrial sector and came up with the concept of self-interest, basically narcissism. So anyone who says they're not narcissistic in this system is pretty much bullshit. Mm-hmm. Because we're all based on what's best for myself and myself only. Mm-hmm. But to him, self-interest was to social life what gravity was to the physical universe. And then along came his student, Adam Smith, who transformed self-interest into a revolutionary new social doctrine. For Smith, self-interest was a principle of human behavior broad enough to provide the basis for a new economic order. He preached that self-interest and the resulting free market principles produced an invisible hand that, if left to its own devices, would lead to the general good. He and his followers proposed that if the government kept its hands out of economic affairs, the natural selfish order of each person would speedily flower into economic well-being for all. That's quite the dichotomous concept. Right? Selfish order will of each person. Narcissism will blossom into the good for all. I don't think so. So this gave rise to a tenet of market faith. Humans have a right that potentially allows each individual unrestricted access to markets and nature's resources. His theory was spread at the time when a myriad of new machines, products, and forms of labor were being developed by the industrial system. No longer was the craftsman or the craft itself valued. It was all about mass production and mass consumption. Adam Smith actually wrote that consumption is the sole end of all production. This was back in the 1700s, he wrote this. Eventually, Smith's market theories evolved into a veritable faith in man's secular salvation through a self-regulating market. Most of us today have never read Adam Smith's book, yet the gospel of self-interest has become second nature to most of us. Greater productivity, individual self-interest, the glorification of competition, greater consumption of goods and services remain the virtually unquestioned dogma of our society. Smith's gospel also transformed the society's view of nature. Smith viewed nature as a vast, unproductive wasteland. His concept of value resulted in the view that nature had worth only when human labor and technology transformed it into useful commodities. The more quickly land or other resources of nature could be turned into material goods, the more wealthy and secure a society would become, and the more progress a civilization could achieve. So this view of nature was revolutionary because for centuries, English land had not been marketed and the alienation or sale of land was strictly forbidden, nor were the fruits of that land sold in a market system. The market doctrine, however, provided the rationale for the unchecked exploitation of nature and the view of land as a commodity like any other. It denied land and nature itself any inherent non-commercial value, and so this transformation of nature from good to goods radically reoriented our relationship to the environment. And suddenly, no longer was the natural world a community of beings, but rather a collection of exploitable and saleable objects. This concept of nature and the other tenets of Smith's gospel are as firmly entrenched in us as any church dogma is. The vision of Smith and his followers of a society of freely contracting individuals, autonomous and self-seeking, was fatally flawed. A contradiction exists at the very heart of the concept of the universality of market laws and the establishment of a society based on the physics of self-interest. If the market system is to be all-controlling, if supply and demand are to be quasi-religious laws, then everything has to be for sale. Everything has to be a commodity in the marketplace. And we might say, well, everything is, but the insurmountable problem with this theory is that not everything is a commodity. In the economic word, the context, in the economic context, the word commodity has a limited and very precise meaning. Commodities are defined as manufactured goods produced for sale. Clearly, central aspects of society do not fit the definition and purpose of commodities. Human labor, for example, which is not manufactured for sale and consumption, is not a commodity, but yet we all think it is. It is both artificial and misleading then to attempt to neatly package and commodify labor, separating wage work from the rest of the life of a human. Labor is not a product. It is personal, intimate, and an intrinsic part of ourselves. Human work cannot be separated from the whole person. Whoever has purchased labor has purchased not just the work of an individual, but a significant and indivisible portion of the life, thoughts, and creativity of the worker, his or her full presence. It's a market. I don't know what I'm doing with my fingers. It's a market. Where am I? Fiction that there is separation between the human being and the human work. We should no more be able to sell our daily labor than sell our very being. but none of us think about that. That's, every job, every corporation has a human resources department making our labor a commodity, but it's not something we can manufacture for sale.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've got to understand this. Land is not a commodity either. Land and the productivity of land are just other names for a part of nature. Nature, with her creative capacities, is of course not produced by people for the purpose of sale and consumption. We have to get this understood, what commodities are. Under the economic definition, we've allowed the word to flow into places where it doesn't even belong. So it is a given. It is a gift. It has intrinsic land. It has intrinsic worth and meaning that can never be measured by the reductionist concept of marketplace value, which is determined by supply and demand. The reality is that nothing created from non-renewable resources can appropriately be treated as a true commodity. This is because little or nothing in nature reproduces in response to human supply and demand needs. For example, there's been an increasing global demand for tuna, and no rational person would suggest that somehow tuna fish around the world have become aware of the supply problem and are desperately trying to conform to market laws and increase their reproduction rate to meet the new demand. The same is true of topsoil. It does not magically increase itself to meet our demands. In fact, we have to create it. We have to help make it. Mm-hmm. For it can be created only in its own time and circumstances. So we now grow our plants in fertilizers, meaning we grow our crops in oil and hazardous waste products rather than soil. Let that sink in. Anybody listening? We grow our crops in oil and hazardous waste products.
Yeah, it's amazing. We eat oil.
Yeah. Well, I mean, every single pill manufactured through big pharma is a petroleum base too. So,
and that's even worse.
Every single one. Every single one.
Yeah.
So nature, when acting without human interference, creates and reproduces according to its own laws and needs. The theories of Smith and all other economists are completely alienated from this obvious reality. By a breathtaking philosophical maneuver, market proponents have, for well over 200 years now, ignored the distinction between commodities and non-commodities. Right? They have created the fiction that elements of human society and nature, such as labor and land, are commodities to be sold and consumed. This bold sleight of hand by which key fictitious commodities were created gave the market system control of virtually all aspects of social behavior and nature, allowing the market doctrine to obtain political and philosophical hegemony over the entire globe. The market system and its commodity fictions are disembedded from all social and ecological relationships. The market system with its supply and demand dogma is an abstraction that for more than 200 years has been imposed on us and on all the animate and inanimate elements of the earth. The earliest evidence of the false contradictions in the market system accompanies the treatment of human work as a commodity, which began with the Industrial Revolution. During the late 18th century, the word labor had been used only for childbirth, but it now became the term used to describe both human work sold as a commodity and the pool of human commodities to be hired by a burgeoning factory system. Before mechanization, workers sold many of their products, but not their work as separate from those products. And now we do. I mean, it's the whole thing. Well, here's the cost of this because I have to make this. My labor has to be paid for, right? Mm-hmm. The mechanized division of labor first accomplished in the text, and all the spiritual gurus are preaching the same thing. Your labor has to be paid for. They're still commoditizing us. Mm. Every single last one of them. Mm-hmm. The mechanized division of labor first accomplished in the textile industry provided Adam Smith with the concept that human work could be commodified on a supply and demand basis like any other product. The commodification of work as mechanized labor became the linchpin of his market theory. So the commodification of human work and land were and remain closely tied together. So in England, the Industrial Revolution became possible only because peasants were forced en masse off the land that they had tilled for centuries by landowners who wanted to convert that land from subsistence farming to the more profitable growing of sheep. This process, which has continued for over 2 centuries, is called enclosure. So when we proudly buy a piece of property and go to closing, that's what we're doing. We're enclosing. It just turns my stomach now too. Right? The things we're so proud of.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks to a series of enclosure acts, the ruling elites were able to amass huge profits from the export of wool through this enclosing of land, which prevented its use by the people. So one could say that sheep devour people. And cattle now, and, Conveniently, the hundreds of thousands of dispossessed peasants now crowded together in the new factory towns and competed for low-paying jobs in the mills of the industrial age. This reality inspired Smith with the idea of human labor as a commodity whose price would be determined by supply and demand, regardless of the impact on the human beings involved. It's really important to note that this enclosure movement continues today throughout the world as banking entities encourage many so-called developing countries to enclose their lands for the production of valuable export crops such as coffee or sugar. Subsistence farmers are still being expelled from their land to crowd the cities. Life expectancy for English workers in the first decades, when Smith had articulated the market theory of labor, was 17 years. 17 years was all they lived. A figure that reflected a child mortality rate of 50%.
Yeah, they weren't even adults.
Yeah. Today, the average person is terribly alone and feels alone. He feels himself to be a commodity, knowing that his success depends on his saleability, his approval by others. He knows that it does not depend on the intrinsic value of his or her personality, not on his or her powers, not on his or her capacity to love, unless he or she can sell them. Being ensconced in the marketing orientation, we not only view ourselves as commodities, but everyone else as well. So we not only see ourselves as things, we also see our neighbors as things. So this pathology of market orientation affects virtually all of our relationships. Competition for success is not an ethic of empathy or inclusion, but of elimination. And when our true self is routinely neglected or even avoided, we select out and develop only those portions of our personality designed to please, compete, and succeed. And so our relations with other commodities become by necessity both superficial and unloving.
Mm-hmm.
We have been taught a widespread and misplaced understanding of evolution that has projected this human market orientation and its competition success obsession onto all of nature. We neglect the lessons of redistribution, reciprocation, and gift giving because we have been taught to see all of nature's interactions as nothing but a competitive fight for survival. And we've been led to adopt the view of nature as a war of all against all. This results in viewing as natural the permanent war with one another for success, and with the rest of nature for our survival in what we've been told is a dog-eat-dog struggle.
Mm-hmm.
No avenue of modern life embodies this attitude more than our relation to work and the workplace. Our labor still ingrains in us an inner sense of being commodities. As a starting point in examining the psychology of our work in the capitalist system, it may be well to dispel the myth that our market system is linked to the growth of freedom and democracy. Those who promote this idea fail to take not note that almost every workplace is a dictatorship, a mini totalitarian state. There is little or no democracy in our market-driven workplaces, and that's absolutely true, because they tell you, oh no, you can only have this many holidays. Oh no, you can only have this many sick days. Oh no, you can only have this many vacation days. And that was a good job in the hospital. A lot of our laborers don't get that. Don't even get that. So everything, is a mini totalitarian dictatorship. So we must open our eyes and realize that although we state we live in a democratic, free society, the reality is that all Americans spend every hour of their working day comporting themselves with the dictator of the market labor, comparing themselves. Hey. My spelling sometimes. Comparing themselves with the dictatorship of the market-oriented labor system. So as long as we continue to sell ourselves as commodities, our success will be determined by others who are not just beyond our control, but who control us. With the workplace engendered market orientation, not only are our work hours being controlled, our psyche is also being mechanized. So we tend to become more and more like the computers and other machines and commodities with which we work, and less able to empathize and learn from our fellow creatures, or to be attentive to the rhythms and patterns of nature. This workplace induced mentality could be called robopathology. Robopaths are those whose behavior simulates machines, human products of a society that worships mechanical efficiency, regularity, and predictability, making us into rigidly conformist, compulsively orderly and efficient, unemotional, and unspontaneous. Thinkers throughout the 19th century, like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, begin to imagine the complete overthrow of the then market system, current market-based labor regime. In response to the threat posed by workers and their newly formed unions, the industrialized countries then began to buffer and alter the free market commodification of labor by passing laws to restrict child labor and to reduce the work hours and such. Mm-hmm. The mechanization of life could only be complete with the mechanization of man. Man, in effect, had to be emptied out of essential humanity in order to be restocked with the artificial needs and conditioned reflexes. So the surrender of a life in real relation with others and the rest of nature, which is demanded by market orientation, comes with perks. The great bargain is that even though the human sacrifices their sense of self as they become successful commodities, they would gain the ability to amass other commodities, both human and non-human, for themselves. So they gave up a life of being for a life of having. And interesting, I was just talking, this concept of the ability to amass other commodities, both human and non-human, for themselves. I was just talking with a friend who owns the local liquor store, and she was saying that she knows a bunch of people in Houston who are barely middle class, so to speak, and yet they all have their maids, right? They have their human commodities. It's a status, right? They cannot exist without their maids, even though it costs them, right? It's just. So we give up a life of being for a life of having maids, and right. Mm-hmm. So in short, we work on the philosophy that I am what I own, not what I do, experience, or believe. So job, a word that retains its original meaning of robbery. Our jobs rob us of our hours and days and of the ability to live ethical work lives. Most of the jobs in our economy are at best amoral and frequently immoral in their use of and consequences for humans and the rest of nature. Looking back over the 200-year history of attempts to buffer the market system, it is clear that those attempts have failed, and we cannot continue to prop up an economic system that is profoundly disconnect it from the fundamental natural and social relationships. And we cannot continue to prop up a system that is about progress and about unlimited growth. By a transposition of terms, progress becomes the salvation man is placed on earth to work out, as there can be no achievement more important than salvation. So there can be no activity that justifies in enlisting our sympathy and support more than progress. So we need a new economic paradigm that fits both nature and human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that new economic paradigm would be salmon economics.
Okay.
Let me get this.
So the salmon economics is the name of the paradigm.
A new paradigm. So the return to sanity now with salmon economics and commoning or communalism.
Mm-hmm.
What can the salmon offer us in an economic paradigm? Well, let's look more closely at the economy of their life cycle. When the Pacific salmon return to the rivers of their birth, they carry in their bodies a number of nutrients garnered from their ocean sojourn. In fact, analyses indicate that riverside vegetation near spawning streams receive 22 to 24% of their nitrogen from the salmon. As a result, the trees on the banks of salmon-filled rivers grow faster. And research shows that at least 1/5 of the nitrogen in the needles of Sitka spruces and other plants near spawning sites come from the Pacific Ocean salmon carcasses. So these same trees that have been fertilized by the carcasses enhance the quality of breeding and rearing habitats for the fish. It's not just the vegetation that profits from the nutrients. Mussel samples taken at these riversides from the vertebrate herbivores, like deer, mice, voles, and squirrels, show increased nitrogen levels. So the animals that eat the salmon also help spread the nutrients. Salmon are the principal source of food for bears, and the salmon's eggs and carcasses are a major food source for sea otters and some trout species. So their carcasses provide critical nutrient resources for many organisms that in turn help enrich the nutrient capital of the wetland itself. 50% of the nutrients that young salmon receive comes from their dead parents. So in contemplating this salmon economics, we find no trace of the self-interest and laws of supply and demand that are endemic to our human market mentality. So what alternative economic values are taught by their life cycle and final journey? Well, number one, redistribution. The riches of the ocean, which is what the Incas did.
Mm-hmm.
The riches of the ocean are redistributed to the wetlands and the rivers. We have minimal redistribution in our current economy. We could say, oh yeah, we do. It's Social Security, disability, and no. Redistribution is not only altruistic or an expression of largesse, it's the fundamental element in successful and sustainable natural economies. Redistribution is the way nature thrives. Number two, reciprocity. Aini. There is a complex reciprocal relationship between the salmon and the future animal and plant generations. Overall, it would be virtually impossible to comprehensively describe the entire reciprocal interaction between salmon and the life around them. Number three, gift giving. Affirms a sense of community, charity, reverence, and the spontaneous sense of the relation between humans and the natural world. Gifts create moral relationships that are more open-ended and less contained than contracts. Gifts initiate and sustain more rounded human relationships where future expectations are unknown and where the exchange of goods is secondary in importance to the relationship itself. So salmon provide the ultimate relational gift, a gift for the otters, the bears, the rainbow trout, and their offspring, and then a gift for all who witness and learn from them. These gifts are not given in calculation of receiving something in return.
Hmm.
Number 4, the importance of the local. Salmon provide remarkable instruction about the fundamental value of place. An Alaskan Fish and Wildlife study found that just 1 drop of water from the home stream of salmon added to 250 gallons of water will take them in the direction of their home stream.
Mm-hmm.
It is impossible not to be astonished by the great odyssey of the salmon and their uncanny ability to find the exact stream and to mate there, with all the redistribution, reciprocity, gift giving, and giving to that local place and its environs. Most of us don't seek capital. We yearn for home, place, and community. The salmon travel freely as they grow and become mature, but will always ultimately return to provide their local community with what it needs. This is a kind of internationalism based on the local. Internationalism allows each of us to travel and learn from all peoples and cultures and geographies, but unlike globalization, it understands that the purpose of this travel is to return and nourish the local with a diversity of knowledge and experience. So salmon economics is an earth economics. Indigenous societies were never based on market economics, but on a mix of reciprocal service and exchange, redistribution of resources, and gift giving, just like the salmon. So their economic behavior was based on the archetypal patterns of the natural systems around them. So the salmon teach us a far different lesson than our current market economy, free market economy does. For them, there is no linear progress or search for perfection. Instead, they seek to complete the cycle of their life. For salmon, it is the circle of completeness that marks their life work. They keep the eternal promise of renewal, not because they are progressing away from the past, but because they are recycling it into each new generation. The salmon's return is not a progressive attempt to escape death. It's a drive for life-giving death. They are a lesson about the cyclical journey of giving one's life so others may live. So before we go into commoning or communalism, I'd like to talk, I'm adding the word communalism. I'd like to talk about a few words here, starting with the word wealth. We describe wealth, most of us, as having lots of money, or for Africans as having lots of cows. The reality is that wealth is in our minds. Wealth is our ideas, our desires, our talents, our urge for service, our capacity to give to mankind and our more than human life world, our love for all of life, and the desire to have the next generations be wealthy also. So we need that in Owl Sustainable Life Dojos. This is our description of wealth. It has nothing to do with money.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the word money. Money is a tool. Money makes a terrible master, but yet is a great servant because it is a tool. In wanting to be wealthy, money should not be the goal. It should never be the goal. Money only has value because we believe it has wealth. Because we believe it does. Got something crazy there. It's printed on paper. We have to look at the fact that it's printed on paper that's really quite worthless. Right?
Yeah.
And the paper of the $1 bill is not any different than the paper of the $100 bill, but yet we get all excited about the Benjamins, the $100 bills, right? With money as our master, it consumes our time and energy and reduces our infinite mental and creative powers to a worry machine. So let's look at some wealth principles. Money is a result. Wealth is a result. Health is a result. And these are coming from the world of wealth is money, right? So we live, illness as a result. Our weight is a result of thoughts we think and food we eat. So we live in a world of cause and effect. Number 2, thoughts lead to feelings. Feelings lead to action, and actions lead to results. If our motivation for acquiring money or success comes from a non-supportive root, such as fear, anger, or the need to prove ourselves, our money and success will never bring us happiness. And we can choose to think in ways that will support us in our happiness and success. And one of the most important is that the money tool is important in the areas in which it works, and it's incredibly unimportant in the areas in which it doesn't work. Next one. When you're complaining, you become a living, breathing crap magnet. And there is no such thing as a really rich victim. The number one reason most people don't get what they want is because they don't know what they want. The secret to success is not to try to get rid of or shrink from our problems. The secret is to grow ourselves so that we are bigger than any problem.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have a big problem in our life, all that it means is we're being a very small person. And if a 100-foot oak tree had the mind of a human, it would have never made it past 10 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
For every giver, there must be a receiver, and for every receiver, there must be a giver. How you do anything is how you do everything. Where your attention goes, your energy flows, and results will show. Either you control money or it will control you. And it's not necessary to get rid of fear in order to succeed. And the only time we're growing is when we're uncomfortable. Training and managing our own minds is the most important skill we could ever own in terms of both happiness and success. And every master was once a disaster. And when you realize your ambition or desire, you will be satisfied for only a brief period of time. Then the urge to expand will come again. And this is life seeking to express itself at bigger, deeper levels through us. So now here's 12 ways rich people think and act different from poor and middle-class people. Rich, successful people believe I create my life. Poor people believe life happens to me. Rich people play the money game to win. Poor people play the money game to not lose. Rich people are committed to being rich. Poor people want to be rich. Rich people think big. Poor people think small. Rich people focus on opportunities. Poor people focus on obstacles. Rich people associate with positive, successful people, and poor people are most always associated with negative or unsuccessful people. Rich people are bigger than their problems. Poor people are smaller than their problems. Rich people are excellent receivers, and most poor people are very poor receivers. Rich people think, I want both and more, and poor people think it's either this or that, nothing different. Rich people have their money work hard for them. Poor people believe they have to work hard for their money. Rich people act in spite of fear, and poor people let fear stop them. Rich people constantly read, learn, and grow. Poor people don't read. They think they don't have time or that they already know everything, so they don't need to read. So now let's move on to commoning or communalism. So the commons is an active living process. It's primarily about the social practices of commoning, acts of mutual support, conflict, negotiation, communication, and experimentation that are needed to create a system to manage shared resources. Commoning reverses market enclosures and seeks to achieve what state and government regulation has generally failed to achieve: ample food, water, and shelter for all equally. Commoning regenerates people's social connections with each other and with nature. It helps build new aspirations and new identities. By giving people significant new opportunities for personal agency that go well beyond the roles of consumer, citizen, voter, or whatever, the commons introduces people to new social roles that embody wholesome cultural values and entail both responsibility and empowerment. It's not about a fixed philosophical vision or policy agenda, but about engaging action in building successful commons or communalism. A commons consists not just of a resource, but of a community that manages a resource by devising its own rules, traditions, and values. It must be understood as a living system of creative agents who build human spaces in which the local and the distinctive matter. Unique experiences, cultural values, and geographies must be recognized and privileged, and it honors the peculiarities of lived experience and honors the generative and intrinsic human value of such peculiarity. Commoners are focused on reclaiming their common wealth.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make certain resources inalienable or protected from sale and conserved for future generations. Commoners are more focused on creating their own alternative systems outside of the market and state. And rather than look to state authorities as guarantors or administrators of their interests, commoners generally prefer to seek direct sovereignty and control over the spheres of life that matter to them. Commoners honor informal, tacit, experiential, intergenerational, ecologic, and even cosmic realities that cannot be comprehended by our rational actor theory. By insisting on the inalienability of living systems and their intrinsic or non-tradable shared value, commoners are building a new system that makes the old one obsolete. Through commoning or communalism, people can begin to move beyond the constrictive social roles of employee, menial labor, consumer, and what other roles we fill to live more integrated lives as whole human beings. This means developing a richer, more vibrant sense of human possibilities than offered by the producer-consumer dyad. So the point of commoning or communalism is the decommodification and mutualization of daily life. Commoners are dedicated to meeting people's basic material needs first and do so in ever-expanding, inclusive ways. Commoners do not treat the environment as an object or commodity, but as a dynamic living system that enframes their lives. They also do not treat the animals and objects, their animals and trees and plants, as objects or commodities, but as relatives, and even rocks. And they desire to act as stewards of nature for the collective benefit. In the commons, people are not motivated by monetary rewards, but by effective labor. Here, people's sense of self and subjectivity are intertwined with their biophysical environment. They take pride and pleasure in becoming stewards of resources that matter to them and their community for the benefit of their next 7 generations. So here's some difference between the dominant patriarchal worldview versus the commoner or indigenous worldview. Number one, the first one is always the current dominant patriarchal view. So we're rigid hierarchy versus matriarchal or non-hierarchical. Fear-based thoughts and behaviors, courage and fearless trust in Holy Mother, the net. Living without strong social purpose in the current patriarchal, and in the commoner indigenous, it's a socially purposeful life. Focus on personal gain, on self and personal gain. Emphasis on community welfare into the next 7 generations. Rigid and discriminatory gender stereotypes versus a respect for wide open gender roles and fluidity. Materialistic, profit-focused, non-materialistic, gift-focused. Earth as an unliving it, and earth as living and loving. Competition to feel superior versus competition to develop positive potential. Minimal empathy, humility, and gratitude versus a strong emphasis on empathy, humility, and gratitude. Anthropocentric versus animistic and biocentric. Words are used to manipulate others versus words being sacred and integrity as essential. And a world of absolute truths versus an infinite universe where there are very few absolutes. Rigid boundaries and fragmented systems versus flexible boundaries and interconnected systems. Disbelief in spirit beings with versus recognition of spirit beings. Minimal contact with other human beings versus highly personal engagement with touching and hugging and laughter. Time as linear versus time as cyclic. Acceptance of authoritarianism versus walking away from authoritarianism. Either or thinking versus both and more thinking. Emphasis on rights versus emphasis on responsibility. Aggression as the highest expression of courage versus generosity as the highest expression of courage. Learning as didactic versus learning as experiential and collaborative. Human nature as inherently corrupt and evil versus human nature as inherently good yet very malleable. Humor used infrequently versus humor being essential to life. Learning is fragment and theoretical versus learning is place-based and holistic. Minimal recognition of personal vitality versus personal vitality being essential. Social laws of society are primary versus laws of nature being primary. Self-knowledge is not necessary versus self-knowledge is of prime importance. Autonomy is sought on behalf of self only versus autonomy being sought to better serve others. Nature as a dangerous or crude resource only versus nature as benevolent and relational. And other beings are not sentient versus all life is sentient. Ignorance of the importance of diversity versus awareness of the vital importance of diversity. Land as a commodity to be bought and sold versus land as a precious gift to be shared by the community. And lastly, it's my private land. I can do with it what I want since it's dead, inanimate, and nothing I do will affect anyone else. Versus we are stewards of the land responsible for its preservation and well-being, and everything we do affects everyone else around us. So there's some examples of communal tenure as Torbal, Switzerland. They since 1224 they've had communalism. Their citizens had private. This village has a 600 population, something like that, and I guess each family has their own piece of land, but they have communal, like the Alpine Meadows are commonwealth, and so they have rules like no family can send more cows to the alpine pastures in the summer than they can afford to feed over winter. So they send their cattle up to the Commonwealth Alpine Meadows to be in care of the herders, who then milk and do everything, make the cheese and everything, and then redistribute that back to the families at the end of the summer when the cows come down from the Alpine Meadows. And this has been going on since 1224. They govern themselves. So then there's villages, Hirano Nagaiki and Yamanoka villages in Japan. Same thing. And then the anthropologist Margaret McKean indicated that she had not yet turned up an example of commons that suffered ecological destruction while it was still a commons. In traditional Japanese villages, the household was the smallest unit of account, but the kumi, composed of several households, was used as an accounting and distributional unit related to the commons. Villagers were required to perform collective work to enhance and maintain the yield of the commons, such as annual burning or specific cutting of timber or thatch, and each household had an obligation to contribute a share to such effort. And each of these villages also devised its own monitoring and sanctioning systems. So common land is owned and governed collectively by a number of persons. And in England today, there's still 7,000 commons. So that's yeah. that's where we're going.
Okay, so wow, I thought that this was going to be like talking about the gospel of greed and how things are greedy, but you've given us, it's not just like the criticism, but you've given us the solutions, and in a listed way, and in the like very orderly kind of, I mean, and that's the amazing thing. How many people are out there just very good, they're very good at and I think we've talked about this before, where you can be very good at pointing out the problems, but then you never really
Offering
even
a solution.
like think about a solution, or you can't really zoom out or just into really wanting to give a solution. And so here's the solution. This is the solution. You've given us the solutions. You've given us examples of how in each one of the cases where greed is being the main driving force of our humanity. I mean, can we allow that to continue? And you're making, you're crafting, and you are gifting to every single one of whoever allows himself to listen to this, the solution. So this is wonderful. And I imagine we are going to continue pointing out problems and solutions. Or what do you think will take us into the next conversation?
Next week, we're going to talk about decolonizing philanthropy.
Okay. So it's like okay, yeah, we can imagine what that is about.
Decolonizing
Okay.
the wealth of philanthropy, the money of philanthropy. So here we are, we're still switching back and forth because the 99.99999% of the population sees wealth as money. And I just described wealth. When you come to our Art of Living dojos, you're going to learn of wealth as your ideas, your willingness to give yourself in service to the rest of humanity and all of our more than human life world for the benefit of our next 7 generations. That's your wealth.
Wow. So there we go. The colonizing, what was that again? The wealth
of philanthropy.
Oh, the wealth of philanthropy now. Okay.
Yeah.
Because then that's a hard thing to hear. Maybe the fact that if you look at
that philanthropy supports colonization 100%.
It's never really philanthropy.
No, it's not really. That's why I let go of I had organized when I first started this mission 8 years ago. It was I had a nonprofit organization, and I let it go because I realized what a farce.
It systematically forces you to repeat the same thing. I imagine when you when you want to become, and you would think that is the proper way because it's a formal way, because you want to make it real, you want to make it formal, but then you stumble into this whole gate of discovery that the whole system's rigged to bring you back into the same colonization, the same paradigm of greed. And
we've got to look at this, so we have to look at it so we understand, because we can only walk away from something once we fully understand exactly what its downfall is and why it's not working.
Okay. Well, so this is wonderful and exciting, and we'll invite people for our next week's conversation. It's going to be at the same time, and of course, the invitation is always there for them to dive deeper into this and to become part of the investigation dojos and to receive the gift of becoming a protege and a student, and of course then
trainee protege,
a trainee. So with that, you want to tell them anything else?
No.
Well, waterfalls of blessings for everyone, and thank you for being here. Please support in any way you can, at least with your your attention, your subscription, or whatever. Help us around the the shadow banning, which is really bad, specifically on the media platforms, mainstream media platforms, to
Yeah.
which we also stream to. So I hope you find us and hope you support us, and see you next time.